Welcome to Built to Adapt at SpringOne Platform 2017. I'm Ciara Byrne and I'm here with Jeff Kelly talking to technology leaders at some of the world's largest and most iconic companies, and also to analysts like our next guest, Rob Stroud, who's a principal analyst at Forrester. So thank you very much for joining us, Rob.
Thanks for having me.
I know DevOps is one of your focus areas, and you brought out some research recently which shows that many enterprises actually overestimate their progress on DevOps. So what's happening there and why is it happening, do you think?
Yeah, sure. So it's really interesting. If we look at where DevOps is really just about fueling business transformation. And every enterprise today is worried about being, infringed on. Financial organizations, fintechs, we've probably heard a lot about that already. And insurance is now insurance techs and rewriting a platform. So this is fundamentally a momentum that's happening in business today. So what's happening is executives realize they have to do business transformation, and they've heard this wonderful catch cry, DevOps. And we've really seen interesting data lately that shows that executives are way on board. They're really all about doing it. The real disconnect happens as you get to the coalface, the execution layer, because DevOps is about people, process and culture change. And there's a lot of hard decisions to be made. You've got to change your organization, restructure how you do things. And there's a fundamental disconnect at the moment in terms of the amount of work that actually has to happen versus the reality of getting to the end result. People want the outcome, they don't want the pain.
So is this partly as well about operations and infrastructure teams not being able to communicate properly with the business teams and vice versa about what DevOps is and what they expect out of it and how quickly it can go?
Yeah, it's really interesting. If we think through is it infrastructure and operations teams and development teams, and if we go back just a little bit to the origins of DevOps, and really we wanted to call it no-ops, as we eroded no-ops out of the equation, and that's not really practical in most organizations. But the moment we've got dev doing agile at almost 70% of the industry is doing agile development, and we've got ops doing waterfall at 70%. So you've got this natural conflict, and what we've actually seen in the last 12 months is operations teams getting on board, realizing they have to transition what they're doing. So they're kind of a little bit behind. We've been doing Agile for about 15 years. So now for an ops team doing DevOps, we've been doing it for about 15 months. So it's kind of a bit of catch up to play.
And was there a tipping point when ops, generally speaking, kind of got it, that this is something we needed to do? You mentioned about 15 months. Was there something that happened? Or was it just a matter of time until they kind of got with the program? I mean, what happened 15 months ago to kind of make that switch?
That's a great question. And one of the things I've been thinking through, we run surveys on an annual basis, and we actually do intermediate surveys as well. And anecdotally, we were hearing and seeing the inquiry balance change. Our end user customers who call us and ask us about what DevOps and what it is. And I saw a rapid change almost 15 months ago from who was calling me. It was typically the dev role, and it's flipped to operations. And they told me it had changed because they'd been directed by management to go faster. And that term go faster comes up a lot. And then if I parallel that to the increase over the last year, I can see that 12 months ago, over 25% of my questions were, what is DevOps and how do I do it? And now it's a whole bunch of other questions. What tooling do I pick? What processes do I change? Things like that. And the inquiry base has also changed, and now it's a lot of enterprise architects calling me, as well as executive leadership.
And do you tend to get more questions around the tooling or the organizational impact of DevOps? Or is it a combination of both, and how do you approach those two questions?
So first, with the balance of questions, we're seeing the what is DevOps decline, which is great. And we're seeing the questions according to a balance. A lot of the questions are about, how do I execute DevOps in compliance? That's a big question. Highly regulated industries. The fastest growing domain in DevOps right now is banking, insurance and finance, by far. So they're suffering or subject to compliance. So they want to marry DevOps with compliance because, the dev just wants to push the go button and have that code go right through to production. And let's face it, I was a dev once, that's what I wanted to do too. But the reality of it is that you've got to operate in a compliant environment. And so the other questions that we're seeing a lot of questions on are things like, how do I select tooling? Right now I've got my favorite, or George or Mary from a vendor turned up and told me that I could just buy one solution from them and it would do everything. Or the exact opposite problem is more prevalent right now. We've got 400 tools doing DevOps. How do I rationalize them? So it's really a mix of those types of things, but then of course the other important question is, how do I change the culture? How do I get rid of this magical change advisory board meeting that takes, you do your change, you pass it across, you do your testing, your QA and staging, then you wait 4 days for the CAB meeting to happen. How do we transition that? So that leads to the whole series of culture questions. And then of course, how do we get into blameless postmortems? And they're really an interesting concept, because ops are used to being beaten up. Oh, we had a failure, it's your fault, we're going to beat you up. Well, the reality is we're going to learn from that and transition. So how you tackle these questions is really about taking people through a learning process. First is it's the old adage of crawl, walk, run. So we do a lot of talking around, where are you? Where do you think you're at? Give us some word pictures of where you're currently at, and then let's help give you back best practices. So you come to an event like this and you can really learn best practices from your peers that are here.
But it's an interesting concept, really learning from your mistakes rather than just kind of beating up the team that maybe something went wrong and you perceive them being responsible for it. It's more, what can we learn from this?
I really believe that's the key aspect, that culture change, that mindset change over treating a failure as an opportunity to learn and remediate the process so it doesn't happen again. Now, I worked in an operations team and set up change management for a large bank at one stage of my career. And every time we had a failure, management forced us to add new additional manual checks. And you look at the reaction to a failure today is you go and look at how you can adapt the process. So there is going to be another check or another balance that you're going to put in place, but you're going to use technology to do it. And you're going to look at your process, and that's the change. And that mind shift change, well adopted and adapted to by development, operations taking a little bit more time.
So what's your advice on actually trying to achieve DevOps in this kind of regulated environment, right? So you are trying to automate as much as possible, but you still have to do these manual checks because there's no way around them in some cases, because you have to comply with the law or whatever. So what are the best practices that you're coming across that are helping there?
So the really interesting best practice we're starting to see is having the audit and compliance and security teams involved in the process.
Okay.
Working, shifting them left so that they become deeply ingrained in setting up the processes, in setting up the automation, setting up the tool chains, identifying when you need these checks and balances. And for instance, there's a requirement for separation of duties. So our initial interpretation of that is, okay, you give me a piece of software, I'll stage it, and maybe you'll install it. That's segregation of duties. Why can't I automate a lot of that? And maybe you'll still press the go button. But the reality of it is that at that point in time, we've actually implemented all those additional processes we did in terms of automation. And we see that a lot. We talk to practitioners here. And what they've done is they've ensured that automated testing cannot be bypassed. Right now today, we have a lot of failures in production because we skip automated testing. So that's really a key aspect that we see happen now, is that people go and say, right, actually you've got much more rigor with our automation, because we are creating, every time you set up a new project or a new development initiative, we're creating a standard environment with our standard tooling, our standard security, our standard compliance. And if you use that unchanged, then the checks and balances you go through are going to be a lot lower. If you want to change it, that's fine, we'll let you change it. But then you've got to go through a higher barrier as you go to production. And what we find in changing the culture in that way, organisations accept the standard platform and the standard development environment and the standard tooling and the standard databases and things like that far more
readily. But you have said that silos of automation, like only doing automated testing, for example, are actually a barrier to success. So can you explain that to us a bit?
Yeah, so silos of automation clearly are the biggest impediment to success. And I see this all the time with organisations. They've got really, really good at maybe doing their CI push. And they'll have that step, and it'll be totally automated, and it'll actually build a release package, and then it'll go to testing. And then we have this wonderful silo where we actually go and build this wonderful change management configuration database, a hangover from our ITIL pass. And we'll build that manually, or we'll go and do some manual constructs around that. And that's really a significant issue we're seeing today, is that actually if you don't transition that process, you're never going to get velocity with quality. Or you just do automated testing, everything else is manual. Once again, stop and start. Now, last time I checked, if you've got waiting on these manual steps, there's going to be lag time, there's going to be learning issues, there's going to be handover conflicts. And I don't know about you, but if I sit and wait for a ticket and I'm interpreting some words on a piece of paper, my version of interpretation versus yours are probably different. We both speak English, but sometimes words mean different things.
Another thing you've talked about is the fact that organizations are struggling with metrics for DevOps.
Yes.
So, tell us a bit more about that and what's your advice there?
Metrics are a very interesting area, and I think we're evolving metrics right now as we speak and watch. So right now, the typical DevOps metrics are things like, how many pull requests can we do a day, or how many pushes can we do to deployment, or how many pieces of code did we deploy. And that's fine, they're good IT metrics, and let's reduce the mean time to resolution or mean time to repair. Once again, nice metric, good to have. I like metrics around things like number of defects in the wild. That's a great metric that I've heard recently, where a customer discovered defect is bad. A defect discovered in the testing process is good. So if we discover defects through our testing and QA and staging process, excellent, that's a positive mark for the team. If we release something into the wild, then we need to go back and look at that defect, and we need to put it to the top of the backlog. We need to resolve that fairly quickly. We need to turn it around without sacrificing quality. But now what the business are asking for is, they're saying, because we're doing these rapid rates of change, they actually want to know what the value proposition of a piece of ideation, a piece of change, a user story. Because one of the reasons is they not only want us to deliver that quickly, and a metric about time to deployment is important, but what about value delivered to the business?
Exactly.
And this is the key metric we're going to see, I believe, in 2018. We're going to start to see organizations, DevOps teams be accountable for the backlog that product team draws down and delivers back to the business, and the business, remember, should run the product team. So what they're going to do is say, okay, we deployed this feature, really nice, really slick, but guess what? Only 3 people have used it. Should we actually even leave that feature there? Maybe we should actually remove it, or maybe we should ask marketing to do a marketing campaign against it. And imagine that level of insight in those features. It's just amazing. We can then have the business make a decision, was that feature valuable then and there? And we can start to remove these functions out of our software that actually add no value. I use the age-old example. We all use Microsoft Word or Excel. There's 100% of features in there, of which I probably use 3%.
Yeah.
What about the other 97? How many of those feature sets can they actually remove from the product? Imagine you had that level of insight in the software you're delivering and deploying. It'd just be amazing.
So is this something similar to the way that site reliability engineering has come up with new metrics to basically align the considerations of operations and the considerations of development, except now we're aligning DevOps and business on some metrics?
Site reliability engineering, often talked about, rarely implemented, by the way. That's one of the big opportunities for 2018. It's a function that we should absolutely do, and that really links the value of operations to the execution of what they're doing. And if you think about SREs being part of the core DevOps unit, then what we're saying is that core DevOps product team is accountable for the business metrics as well as the execution metrics.
Yep.
And that's the linkage we're going to be seeing, I think, going forward. It's the linkage we need to see what we're doing in terms of modern technology to be successful. Because at the end of the day, we can go really, really fast and we can deliver lots of features that no one wants. We actually have to link it back to business need. That's what we're here for, the last time I checked anyway.
Very interesting.
And kind of getting back to some of the technology, I mean, obviously, there are emerging technologies. Containers are increasingly, obviously, very popular. We're seeing more around serverless and function as a service. How do emerging technologies like that impact how companies are going about implementing DevOps and adjusting to some of these new approaches?
It's really interesting. If I was sitting here 12 months ago, I would have said to you that containers, which were the buzz then, right, and Kubernetes, of course, and Docker with the buzzwords around it, would be used for net new workloads. What we've actually seen over the course of the last 12 months is organizations actually wrapping traditional applications in containers and deploying them in cloud environments or even on-premise clouds, whichever you want to call it. That has been that adoption has been far faster than we predicted. And we've actually go back and look at our prediction numbers again. We've seen organizations leverage those, and that actually helps DevOps. Because if we start to package our traditional workloads in containers and transition them, we get flexibility of workload, we get flexibility of scaling, well, sort of. We could have an argument on that later. But we get some ability to make those workloads transportable so we can put them on the lowest cost platform. So what's happening though with serverless and functions as a service is we've actually seen widespread adoption of the concepts of it, and we're actually starting to see some organizations who have appropriate workloads that are really relevant actually say, let's skip containers and let's go straight there. Because if I can actually write something leveraging functions as a service or serverless, I actually don't need to worry about the infrastructure components at all, because I'm just writing execution code. And I can just write that code and point it at the particular compute resource and have it execute and come back. And all my abstractions of the operational requirements are all done for me. And this allows me a lot of flexibility, plus my developers can just worry about writing execution code. And let's face it, last time I checked, there was a developer shortage in North America and probably the whole world. So the better and the more focused I can get them, the more productivity I'm ultimately going to get.
Okay, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for watching.